Thanks, Ian. And first of all, thanks to Ian and Andy. I've certainly learned a lot from working with you both over the last few days to kind of pull the content of this little section together. And it was really, I'm just reflecting there when you were speaking, Ian, about all the similarities when we first met. We didn't really know each other from Adam, and we first met and we were talking about all what the things that we thought were interesting pieces of practice, and they were so similar. So thanks very much for sharing that. Colleagues, where I sit in this kind of process is I work as I'll call it the second teacher. Donald said to me earlier on he's changing the language to the other teacher. So I sit as the second teacher or other teacher as part of the Higher Maths webinar series. And I suppose what that gives me is a real kind of honour and privilege of being able to look at sessions that Andy and myself, I suppose, are running, but not just through my own eyes, but also through the eyes of the learner. And I think that gives us both a great platform to kind of work from together. So I think today what I was going to speak about, very short input from me, was just a few themes that I've noticed that have come up over the last few weeks and months. In particular, the importance of communication, the importance of feedback, and the importance of relationships, and try and share with you a few of my own experiences around these themes. So if we take like communication, I suppose, how do we communicate with learners? And what I certainly found very quickly was it is different. We don't have our own classes that we're working with here. Yeah, we might have youngsters that have stayed with us, and I know Andy will probably echo this. You really do get attached to the names that you see coming out. Oh, I see he's back tonight, or she's in this week, and so on. But they're not our own classroom, so we don't have that relationship. So we had to really work hard early to try and break down those barriers and build those relationships from an early stage. So how I suppose that we tried to do that was through things like the use of polls. So you can see there on the screen the way that Andy's communicating through the chat function in Microsoft Teams, the way that he tries to make things really clear for learners, not huge amounts of information in chat, just enough to keep them interested and keep them engaged. And then we'll offer up opportunities for learners to help us shape the session. So although we will submit to Donald ideas on what the 8 webinars will look like, we're certainly very learner driven around that, and we take use of things like polls in advance. So it's not, I suppose really what I'm getting at here is that it's not simply the session. There's all the other stuff that we do in our own time, in time out with the session that actually sets that up. And I think what that does, it really, well, certainly from the feedback that we seem to get from learners, is that really matters to them. And from literature that I read, that importance of dissolving the screen really comes in there, and learners feel that they're very much part of the kind of process of pulling these webinars together. So you'll notice. Andy, if you want to click the next slide, you'll notice that you can see there at the side that the percentages, maybe where these are screenshots of past polls that we've used. You can see how the split happens, and that's understandable. Learners have got different ideas of things they want to work on, but what we certainly do, I would like to think really well, is that we take on board that feedback, and then we attempt to try and adapt our sessions in order to meet the needs of the learners. So it might be that we can join up two of those particular kind of topic areas together and work from there. So yeah, I think really what I'm getting at here is the importance of polls and surveys and always asking for feedback in the first instance. The next slide that's up there at the moment, to me, highlights the importance of the chat function in the webinars. And I deal with the chat a lot because Andy tends to be doing the teaching part of it. So my feeling has always been to be really, really efficient with your chat, and also try and make use of learners' names wherever we possibly can. And I just think that, again, comes back to that point I was making earlier on about dissolving the screen. I don't know these learners, but if I'm using individuals' names, then first of all, it means that I am listening to them and they can see that. And also it just feels that they're engaged within the session. And for me, that has certainly been really, really important. And sometimes I'll come on mic and I'll say something like, Mr. Thompson, there's a question from Jennifer, and instantly Andy will jump in with, hello, Jennifer, that's a great question. So we're always trying to use supportive language, learner names, all of these things to try and make everybody feel engaged. And as Donald pointed out earlier on, there could be anything. We've had anything up to 200 folk or whatever it is within webinars. So wherever we can do that, all the better. We also try and use the chat function for clarity. So often we have, as you can imagine, learners arriving late to sessions. And so maybe what will have happened is Andy's maybe done a wee bit of an input and then set a wee task, and then I'm monitoring things like the lobby, and I realise that person X has joined a little bit late. So I'm trying to take Andy's instructions and place it in the chat as succinctly and as with as much clarity as possible. So that's where I think the dual teacher scenario really kind of works. Other wee things that we use in the chat, you can see there, things like the use of emojis. We sometimes write up sentences that we will ask learners to like. So it might be a case of their understanding on something, and we'll ask them to click a like that most applies to them, so we can see where the number of likes are sitting, and then we adapt the session to suit that. And then, Andy, if you move on to the next slide. And then we also, as Ian pointed out there, and I'm not going to go over his ground there, we use forms, we use quizzes, and in particular, we use multiple choice questions regularly. I'm thinking back to a scenario that we had where there was a little bit of teaching input. It was a kind of almost like a wee knowledge check of learners. And Andy had asked them to place which, A, B, C, or D they thought the answer was. And we knew that the answer was C. And what we began to notice in the chat was that learners were almost like follow the leader was happening. So we, and of course they were way off on the wrong tangent. So we had to pull that one back in. But that then made us think, well, wait a minute, if we slow that down and actually ask learners to undertake the question and then don't press anything until such time as we're basically all ready, and then enter the letter, then hopefully we won't have that group think scenario happening. So it's just little things that we've learned over the course of our time delivering the sessions. So Andy, just move on to the last slide. Just finally, there was some just a little bit of feedback there that we've had, really nice feedback, and all I can say is that my experience in the whole process has been hugely positive. I feel like I genuinely feel like I'm making a difference for learners through this way, and really enjoy working with Andy and people like Ian to learn more. So wherever you can collaborate with colleagues, take the opportunity to do so. Andy, I'll hand over to yourself.
Thanks very much, Andy. So as Andy was saying earlier, I mean, there are two teachers, but we talk so much about things that certainly neither of us really see a lead teacher or a second teacher. It's really, we're just a resource, and what we're trying to do between the two of us is to make that experience for the learners as good as possible. I will say that when I sat down to do the first webinar, I have to say about half an hour before it started, I was as nervous as anything. And in fact, I was sitting there thinking that this reminds me of the first time I got sent to the headmaster in primary school, where I was anticipating getting the key, and that's how bad it was. So obviously, if you've not done any of this before, it is quite nerve-wracking, but like with anything, once you get into it, the nerves still will go. So given that I'm sort of feeling a bit like at the start of the episode of an A-team episode, and I'm really looking for Hannibal and BA to come and help me out and get me out of trouble, you start then thinking about just some simple things that you just have to make sure that you do so that things can move smoothly. I'm terrible for forgetting to switch my mic on. The number of times, Andy, I'll tell you this, when I've been gloriously talking away, and only for Mr. Brown, Andy Brown, to interrupt and say, Mr. Thompson, I think your microphone's off. So little things like that. And the funny thing is, I don't know if I'm getting much better at it. I still, the number of times when I think my mic's off and it's on, or it's on when I think it's off, which is potentially more worrying. However, that's a whole nother story. So just little things like that, being aware of your screen and the mic and things like that. So thinking about what we're trying to do here, I mean, we're obviously getting more and more research coming through about online learning and remote learning. And just looking here, this is taken from the summary document that the EEF released a while ago. And it's really this idea of pedagogy trumps everything. So it's about trying to forget about the medium by which you're delivering and focus on those core elements of pedagogy that we know work and that we need to be making sure we incorporate into our teaching. So looking for the explanations, the scaffolding and the feedback. So just picking out those three things. I'm just going to sort of show you some examples of how we've tried to do that. And the second thing is obviously we want our learners to be independent. We want to build the metacognitive skills that will allow them to become more independent. So within this environment of teaching online, we're thinking about those aspects of good pedagogy, and then we're also thinking about how we can, release or relinquish the yoke, so to speak, in order to give them things that they can go off and work at on their own. So as Donald said, we don't do live lessons in terms of teaching content, although some of our webinars have been teaching something specifically in the higher course where learners have asked us to do so. But retrieval practice is such an important theme of what we do, because we know how important it is for knowledge to be retrieved, and within the context of a highly demanding course, and we know hires are very demanding right across the board, it's really important that we find ways to build in that retrieval as much as possible in order to help learners develop the capacity to cement that knowledge and those skills into long-term memory. So obviously Impact Wheels here, they've got lots of nice resources. There's loads of stuff out and about. So thinking about what the research says in terms of what we need to do in order to make these experiences better for the learners. So we've created a profile spreadsheet which basically contains all the coded skills for the higher maths course. And these essentially form learning intentions each week. The learners have downloaded a copy of this, and in each column in the empty cell they can enter a number from 1 to 5. The cell will then color code itself automatically. And the idea though is that this is meant to be fluid, so there's an example of two parts of a profile, so done at 2 different times by the same learner. And it's interesting how where they felt they really weren't good at a particular skill before, they now feel more confident. That was skill C7. But interestingly, in skill C2, they now feel less confident, and that can sometimes happen whenever something's brought into the mix for retrieval that they haven't done in a while. But of course, that desirable difficulty, that productive struggle, is exactly what we need in order to move learning on. So it's about making sure that we talk to the learners and about making sure that they don't jump too quickly to making a really harsh judgment on themselves, when with a little bit more support we can bring that knowledge back and see and they can see that they can actually do what it is they're supposed to be doing. So learning intentions, we keep this really simple because they've got this higher syllabus grid on one page, which is really nice because it helps to take away some of the mystique and the mystery and show them that this isn't as bad as you think. Here all is on one page. And then these are the skills that they know they're going to be working on and doing questions on throughout a webinar. So if they have their profile open, then they're going to have opportunities to update that profile, and they can ask us what we think. So somebody might say, I think I'm okay with this, and we can come in and say things like, did you get the answer to that question, or what was your answer, and are you feeling confident about it? It's just trying to, it's almost like a little mini learning conversation, if you like, where you're trying to just gauge exactly where they're at so they can make a more accurate judgment about where they think they're at. But of course, it's when you're dealing with learners that you don't know and from a range of schools and local authorities, it is important that you keep trying to constantly find out as much as you can about where they're at and what they know. So obviously we can use the polls to ask questions about content that they've covered, and then we can use that to build our webinar. But obviously within a webinar, this is an example that similar to what Ian did. This is just a quiz, and interestingly, I can go straight in and see how many people got it right. And also something we've built into ours is we like to ask for a confidence rating. And interestingly, on this question, the average confidence rating was 3.7, which is okay. But if we're thinking about that as being the arithmetic mean, sorry, I'm a maths teacher, I have to say these things, then it might suggest that there's perhaps quite a few that were well below 3 in terms of their confidence. So straight away, just even seeing data like this, well, I feel I should really tender my resignation, because clearly I've been an utterly useless teacher. But if I can get over that, then the first thing we're thinking is, right, that's going into next week. And then it's about, do we do it as a starter? Are we going to do some element of reteaching? So rather than just pop the question up, do we want to go back over and try and just reteach the idea to try and retrieve that knowledge? So this kind of information is just, it really is priceless, and it's all part of helping to develop that picture of where learners are at and where we need to take them. This is an example of what we call in our webinars scaffolding. And just like Ian, I've now started using the sways so that learners can have all the resource in one place. And of course, having that link means they can go and look at the sway anytime they want. So this might be described as a sort of worked example, but what we try to put into them in green, there are the sort of steps, the basically the what you do. But in purple, what we're trying to do is make the thinking explicit. So we're trying to show why we do what we do. Why did you do that? What does that lead to? Where does it go? And we're asking learners to think about these questions whenever we're doing these examples. And we can make use of other strategies, problem pairs, for instance, and it's all designed to really support that retrieval and to provide what we hope will be scaffolding that the learners find really useful. So again, this is typically how it would appear to the learner on the sway. So an example here on graphs. And obviously, one of the great things about sways is that there are so many different things that you can embed into them. So tonight, I'm actually with Andy delivering at 6 o'clock. And this is a screenshot from the sway we're using. And this is a really brilliant app called GeoGebra, which is free. And I have customized the toolbar so that the learners can go in and type in different equations. There's a pen facility that they can use to draw sketches, and I'm going to show them how they can use the hand tool to move the graph around on the screen so they don't get things all cluttered up or too tight or whatever. And then what we have is we have various check boxes that are going to do certain things to help them visualize what's going on. So trying to make it a really, obviously, an interactive experience and hand ownership of that learning over to them, get them thinking about what's going on, because it's really important that they do that. We obviously use diagnostic low stakes quizzes frequently, and the multiple choice questions are great for discovering little misconceptions. And this is just another example of that. on my sways at the very start, I link whatever skills we're covering to the WestOS ClickView videos. And because, obviously those videos are longer and they go into much more depth, I think it's a really good way to encourage learners to access them, particularly if there's maybe something they're maybe still not totally sure about. It's another place they can go to get some more information and to be able to see what's going on. So, again, a great resource. The videos are nice and clear. The teachers are very experienced. It's providing an extra layer in that scaffolding, and it's great that that's been done. And I'm certainly very, very keen to showcase that as much as possible. Getting to tasks, I think, depending on where you come from, maths can sometimes be perceived by those who don't teach it or don't like it as a bit dry. But what we try to do with our activities, it's the emphasis on the thinking. That's the most active part of real mathematics, is the thinking that you get people to do. So rather than just chunder through loads and loads of examples that are barely related, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make connections. We're trying to provide the challenge. Here's an example of a task where, as they move down the table to fill blanks, the level of challenge ramps up significantly. So in this one task, what we're trying to do is provide that active experience. The chat allows us to go in and help people, but for those people who need that extra challenge, we're obviously trying to provide it. Exit tickets are a great strategy, and again, that is often just a single question, and we might give that obviously at the end of the webinar. As always, we can go back, have a look at the responses, and where something might indicate that we need to spend maybe a bit more time on that at the following webinar, then that's obviously what we would do. So really, the whole thing comes back to the pedagogy, and then the feedback that we get, the feedback in the chat, and I have to commend Andy. He's absolutely phenomenal in the chat at being able to respond to so many questions, to point me to examples that it might be good to do in the board. He's checking all the time for how the learners are getting on, and that dissolving the screen is really important to us, because when you've got maybe 130 people in the webinar, any chance to use names, any chance to really build those relationships any little way you can is obviously really, really important. And getting that feedback from the chat, from the quizzes, from the diagnostic questions, from the tasks and the questions that the learners actually put to us, that really helps to build that picture, and then helps us look at how we're going to form the next episode on learning. So that's basically it from me.